Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bobby Velasco. Currently in Southern California, have been a software engineer professionally for 9 years now. And I guess a little bit of background to my journey into coding. I first got intrigued by coding when I was in undergrad. I took a MATLAB class. It was to fulfill a requirement for math, but also kind of see if I liked coding. I turned maybe a few assignments in and lasted maybe 2 or 3 weeks before it was kind of way over my head, just because it involved a lot of mathematics and also programming, which I had no background in. So um, I was a little bit discouraged and thought maybe coding's not for me. So, I mean, I ended up graduating with a degree in international studies, but kind of still didn't know what I wanted to do. I had thought about maybe working for an NGO or for a nonprofit, but during college I worked in the restaurant industry, so kind of held on to that job until I kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And along the way, I discovered Codecademy through a friend. He told me about this website where you could learn at your own pace. You could study web development like HTML, CSS, and it was kind of gamified as well. So it was not just like boring tutorials. So I just created an account that was about in 2014, and I instantly thought, well, this is pretty approachable. I never thought I would make a career out of it, but I just kept on doing more and more lessons. Eventually, I had a coworker who told me about his brother who did a boot camp in San Francisco, and he completed the boot camp and was able to find a job within a few months. So that got me thinking, okay, maybe a career in web development is maybe more attainable than I actually thought. And so around the same time, Codecademy was offering what are called Codecademy Labs. I think that was like a one-time thing. They were testing the waters to see if they could get people to go in person for a 12-week course. So I did that in Culver City. I think I was the first cohort at that time. It was in early 2015. And that just gave me more and more confidence to keep on wanting to make that career change. And so my goal after completing that Codecademy course was to apply to a boot camp. And so with the skills that I learned, not just on the Codecademy platform, but in that in-person 12-week course, I got more and more confident, started building side projects, and then just studying to interview to get into the boot camp. And I ended up getting in, and I think it took me about 4 or 5 months to get my first job, but uh, never looked back and made the career change.
Thanks, Bobby. Um, Bobby, do you want to share a little bit more about what you're doing now in your day-to-day job and maybe some of the skills the hard skills and the soft skills that have kind of helped you um, with your work that you're doing on the day-to-day?
Sure. So currently, I work for a company called ICF. It's a consulting company. They're based on the East Coast, but they have offices all throughout the US and in several other countries. My title is a senior software engineer. I focus mainly on the front end, which I have historically throughout my career, but if anything comes up like back end or even sometimes DevOps related, I just jump in whatever is needed. So it's a lot of having kind of a base knowledge of programming. I mean, whether you apply it to front end or back end development, to be uh, coding, or functional programming, or class-based programming, but pretty much all those skills that are a foundation always help me kind of with anything new that I need to pick up, whether it's a new technology, a new language. Right now, I'm working on a couple of front end repos. One of them is in React, which I'm really knowledgeable in because I've been working on it most of my career. But we also have an Angular app. And because I have a pretty good foundation on JavaScript and TypeScript, I was able to jump in and just kind of take my knowledge and apply it and then just learn as I go to be able to support that team and that repo. So I guess in terms of stuff that I've learned throughout my career, I think having a good basis of CS fundamentals, pretty much algorithms, nothing too crazy like linked lists or that, but having a good knowledge of just like map, reduce, filter, all of those come in handy because pretty much working on the front end, I'm working with a lot of data ingestion and then representing data and sending data back and forth from the server. And yeah, so CS fundamentals probably come up in my day to day. I work a lot with HTML and CSS with whatever front end framework or library I'm working on. And other than that, pretty much anything else that I have to pick up, I can either do a tutorial or find like a blog post or just learn as I go. Luckily, at this job, it's not too intense like my previous jobs at startups where I can kind of take the time to learn something and work at my own pace as opposed to previous jobs kind of just having to pump out code and features constantly.
And I'm just gonna we'll keep it a very casual conversation and I'll insert some questions that our learners are asking us as you're speaking about your experience. But one of the questions that Chandel had was how many coding languages do you use in your day-to-day work? Just so there's an idea of what our learners can expect.
The main ones, I guess, that I've encountered in my web development career are HTML, CSS, JavaScript or TypeScript, and probably if it's not CSS directly, it's probably some kind of layer on top of CSS like Sass or less, anything like that. But those are pretty much the main ones. If I'm doing backend work, it's usually in Node these days, but I've worked at previous companies with Ruby and also Phoenix and Elixir.
And Chandel also wants to know, did you ever have to suddenly learn something that you didn't know about? Maybe something on the job while you're working or it's a
Yeah, yeah,
yourself?
definitely. Recently, I did a project where we're trying to convert some of our backend code server calls that we have in Node to Lambda functions in AWS. So I'm starting to get more exposure to kind of the AWS world. Previously, I had worked with Google Cloud, and then also at my first job, I think we had AWS backend infrastructure. But most of my career, I've been just doing kind of mainly front end, a little bit of back end. But right now, uh, one of my recent tasks was kind of more infrastructure with AWS and learning Lambda functions and just being able to go through and jump into their documentation. It's been really useful. We pay for a service called Pluralsight where they have lessons that you can go and watch. So I also watched a few videos and kind of got myself up to speed with, how to approach the technology, what its use cases, and how we were going to implement it for our use. But yeah, that was kind of one of them that I just recently picked up. It was something new. I thought I would challenge myself with something kind of out of my comfort zone. But yeah, I mean, those opportunities are constantly coming up in the job, and if they don't, then you can ask if you get bored and say, hey, I want to do more back end work or I want to do more front end work. Is there an opportunity for me to work on mobile? Usually, if it's a company that has the resources to allow you to jump around, and you will have the opportunity.
Thanks. We have a lot of questions from our learners, so we're gonna just kind of go through them and feel free to take your time answering them. But the first question is, what advice would you give to someone who isn't all that great at networking?
I'd say it's going to be part of the job. Staying relevant with your coding skills is definitely kind of first and foremost. But in order to get that first job, get that second job, you're going to have to build a network, whether it be on LinkedIn or going to events like meetups. But I guess it's just challenging yourself to get out of your comfort zone. I mean, it could be, baby steps like, messaging somebody on LinkedIn that you don't know, or going to a meetup and just trying to talk to somebody and get some exposure like that. But it's definitely going to work in your favor the better you are at networking. if you're a shy person, that's understandable, but getting out your comfort zone is definitely going to benefit you in your career.
And how many jobs did you apply to each week, and what did you do to keep track of them? Keep track of them all. So in your blog, you talk a lot about um, you were applying. You were on LinkedIn 7 days a week, and you're probably applying a lot. But how did you? How give us a number? How many did you apply to each week, and what was? Did you keep track of them? Did you do other things besides apply? Did you reach out to recruiters? Walk us through someone who might use LinkedIn as their platform to find a job.
Sure. LinkedIn was probably the platform that I leveraged the most. I also used other job websites, but I guess in terms of keeping myself organized, I just created a spreadsheet. I would have the different columns with like the website where I found the job, how I applied. Did I apply directly on their website? Did I apply on LinkedIn? And any information that I could have about the position itself or somebody to follow up with if maybe I got to the next round, just making sure that I kept that up daily. A lot of them maybe didn't go anywhere because not all companies will reject you outright. The ones that do, I mean, that's fine. If you get a call with a recruiter, I would track it into the spreadsheet. I think just kind of staying on top of that, committing to doing, let's say, maybe 5 a day or 10 a day, whatever your number is that you're comfortable with. Um, so when I was in the boot camp, they had, I think, a certain number that they wanted us to do per week. So I was kind of at our discretion to do 5 per day to get to our 25 per week max. But I think it's whatever you can handle. You don't want to burn out, and you also want to be able to put out quality applications. I don't think it's necessary to maybe have a cover letter for every single one. Maybe the ones that are most appealing to you in terms of company or culture or say job description, but make sure that you're going to make your application and your resume stand out if you're not doing a cover letter.
And on the topic of resume stuff, what certifications do you recommend for having for your resume?
Certifications in terms of like AWS or something of that nature.
Kelly, do you want to clarify if there's a specific certification you're looking for? I think, Kelly, yes to AWS.
Yeah, anything along those lines, AWS, or if at this point, would you recommend learning AI as well, or should you really stick to like either front end or back end? And also, would you recommend learning computer science also as well at this point?
I guess it depends on what your area of focus wants to be. I think a lot of people kind of know if they want to go into, say, back end or front end, mobile or DevOps. I think having a good sense of what your strengths are and what you can kind of play towards for getting that first job. I've talked to a lot of boot camp grads who have approached me after they graduate because they see that I'm, have in the industry for several years and I graduated from a boot camp. And so some of them just have a clear direction where they want to go. Others are like, oh, okay, well, I'm working on a Python stack and I'm also doing mobile development. My advice to them is always, pick a direction for at least the first job. If you want to, change directions later on in your career, that's fine. But I think the important thing is to be hyper focused on getting that first job and the skills that are required to do so, whether they be front end skills or back end skills. And right now, if you're just getting your first job, certifications may help, but I think having a portfolio site or uh, something like on the internet that you've built that you can kind of point towards if you're in an interview setting and they said, oh, hey, what have you been working on? And then you can say, oh, well, go to this link and I've been working on this and I've learned this such and such technology to build it. I think that will speak better than having, some kind of a certification on your LinkedIn. Because I think if you're early on in your career and you don't have any experience, that's probably not going to weigh as much.
And I know that you had mentioned that you went to a boot camp. Um,
Mhm.
Could you tell me what boot camp that was? And also, do you feel like that would be a good way for somebody who hasn't had a higher education to kind of help them get their foot into the door?
Yeah, I think I had a great experience going to the boot camp. I went to one called Hack Reactor. It's, I think, now under an umbrella called Galvanize, but you can look them up. They're a pretty big boot camp across the nation. They have online boot camp programs as well as in person. I did the in person one back in 2015. It was a great experience. Pretty intense. It's not for everybody. I'm gonna just say that right out. But if you feel like you want to have the time to commit 3 months in person and really want to make a career change, I think that that's the way to go. Especially since there's so much competition these days with university grads and also people who are on the job market who've been laid off. There's a lot of competition, so anything you can do to kind of stand out is probably good. Uh, I think back when I was looking for a job, my first job, I was boot camps weren't as well known, so there was a lot of stigma. A lot of companies didn't want to hire boot camp grads, but I think now there's a lot more acceptance. So I think it's if you have the drive and you have the time to commit those 3 months, I think it's a good way to go.
Thanks, Bobby. And then we had a question about portfolio. How and what do you
Mhm.
recommend to have in your portfolio as a full stack engineer newbie? This is someone who's never worked in tech before.
What I've seen a lot is having kind of a portfolio site where it's kind of like a mini resume where you can have links to maybe your LinkedIn, maybe a physical resume or PDF that somebody can look at, side projects that you've worked on, technologies that you're familiar with that you've used on those side projects. Yeah, if you Google like portfolio site, you'll get a lot of good suggestions. But yeah, I think those are kind of the main key factors. Having your any kind of relevant job experience, education, whether it be like Codecademy courses that you've completed or any other certifications that you've had. Also, any links to your GitHub, perhaps, uh, side projects, maybe a list of the languages that you know or technologies that you've worked with. Yeah, something along those lines.
And would you recommend learning computer science as well as front end, back end, or full stack?
I think if you have the time, it will benefit you to learn computer science fundamentals. But if you don't have the time to dedicate, what you can do instead is learn kind of algorithms and data structures, which is, I mean, involved in computer science, but there are a lot of resources out there for you to see what kind of algorithms questions you would get in maybe a junior web developer interview and kind of learn those. They're kind of tips and tricks that you can learn to help, deconstruct the question and maybe certain algorithms that you can use to get the answer that you need, or at least the one that they're looking for in the interview setting. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with learning computer science if you have the time, but I mean, it could be a lengthy process. But I think if you're just wanting to do well on interviews, maybe focus more on algorithms and data structures for whatever level you're at.
What advice would you give to someone who doesn't have the strong background in math skills?
I don't encounter math that much in my job. I think it's more kind of logic based work that I do. I mean, I was just talking about algorithms. So just kind of understanding logically what kind of steps you're going to need, to make a server call or to manipulate data in a certain way. Kind of having more of a logical foundation. Mathematics, I mean, yes, it will benefit you, but I don't think it's that important. Not in my day to day, at least.
Good to know. I hope whoever asked that question that helps bring you some peace. Um, is there any advice you would give or you can give to someone in their late 40s who's trying to learn how to code and get their foot in the door?
Sure. I mean, it's never too late. I decided to make my career change in my early 30s. So I was a little bit intimidated going to a boot camp. There were kids who were a lot younger than I was. There were kids who were in their early 40s, and we all worked on projects together. We all supported each other, built a community. I think try not to have too much imposter syndrome because it'll be there, but just kind of reassure yourself that hey, there are people of all walks of life, all ages are that are wanting to make a career change and learn, and don't be discouraged.
And that segues very well into the next question, which is about imposter syndrome. I know you touched upon it a little bit, but did you experience that personally, and how did you handle it? And any like specific and tangible tips that kind of help you navigate that if that's something that you experience?
Sure, I experienced it before going to the boot camp, during the boot camp, and pretty much at every single job that I've had, to varying degrees. But I think earlier on in my career, I had it the worst, and I think you just have to try to take a step back and realize, hey, you're not going to know everything at the beginning. You're going to learn as you go. It's all right to ask questions. In fact, when you're early on in your career, you should be asking a lot of questions. I think the biggest mistake that I made early on in my career was not asking enough questions and thinking that I would have to figure it out all on my own. Whereas I could have asked somebody more senior, hey, can you help me out with this? Or I'm stuck. And figured it out a lot faster and not been spinning my wheels. But yeah, imposter syndrome, I'm sure most, if not all people go through it. So there's nothing wrong with that. I'd say try not to think about it too much and, surround yourself with, coworkers or your community, lean on them for help and support.
A lot of our learners are just breaking into their careers or making a career switch. And I think kind of the first phase to getting your foot in the door is being able to land interviews, but nailing the interviews. Could you give us maybe some practice tips or tricks of how you prepped for interviews? What were some skills or things that have helped you get jobs by really acing the interview? What is some knowledge you can pass along to our learners who need those skills and more practice in that area?
I'd say earlier in your career, there's going to be probably more, depending also on kind of the name of the company or the job itself. But I think early on in the career, there's more of a focus to weed people out with algorithm type questions or whiteboarding type questions, just so they know that you understand how to code. So knowing how to take a question and break it down into different steps and building an algorithm to solve that question. So I think on top of your knowledge base of your language or your area of focus, whether it be front end or back end, really kind of understanding algorithms and certain data structures. You don't need to know all of them. I think arrays and maps are probably two of the biggest ones that you're going to be using. This is my cat. She wants to say hi. But I'd say, yeah, early on, focus on coding fundamentals and then algorithms and data structures, because I think that's what's going to help you in the interview setting on top of just the base knowledge that is required for the job. What I noticed in my last job search, there were a lot fewer of those, and it was more kind of architecture type questions, how to architect an application or a certain feature. They just want to know that you understand kind of a high level of how to organize your code and write clean code, write reusable code. But those should also be focuses of yours. But I think early on, having a good understanding of the language that you're going to be testing in, whether it be JavaScript or Python, and then also being able to solve, algorithm questions that are at your level or for the position that you're going to be applying to.
Thanks, Bobby. Um, in general, how supportive are coworkers? Do you find that coworkers really want to help you get your feet under you? Is everyone rushed to get their own work done?
I think depends on the environment. I was lucky enough to work for two really good startups early on in my career, and it was just a very energetic kind of environment where people support each other. There was kind of no ego involved, and if you asked for help, people were willing to help because they made the time to want to see you thrive in your position, and also in turn help the company thrive. So I think you'll get a good sense of it when you start. Just kind of, I guess you can also, when you're applying and you're asking questions in the interview, ask about the company culture. That's something that I always do to see, do they do events? Do they go to happy hours, or if they're just strictly remote, do they have events, to facilitate, company bonding or team bonding, that type of thing. But in my career, everybody's been willing to help each other. I mean, I help junior devs, I help senior devs who are stuck, maybe not familiar with certain things, and if you're willing to ask for the help, you'll get it.
That's awesome to hear. Digging a little bit more into the portfolio question for someone that has done zero personal projects yet, because this person has only been doing the ones in Codecademy, how many
Mhm.
projects would you think is enough to have in a portfolio and the length and depth of each? Because when this person is finishing the course, I'll have to invest time in making a decent portfolio to be able to apply to jobs.
Yeah, I'd say start with just one. Make sure it's a strong one that's gonna, highlight the skills that you know and have learned. Yeah, the more the better probably. But if you are really strapped for time, make one that's really strong that really highlights, your knowledge base to the point that you're at. Uh, yeah, don't be afraid to not do it just because you think there's a certain number that you have to have done already. I'd say start doing one and that'll be fine.
Thanks. Thank you for answering all those rapid fire questions. Does
Mhm.
anybody else in the audience have any more questions for Bobby? It could be related to something specific that you're currently dealing with, whether it's through Codecademy, your career journey, your maybe it's a coding thing that you've been really struggling with. This is your time to ask Bobby. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself or put in the comments. We have another question that just came in. Have you worked remotely as a beginner?
As a beginner, no. My first, I think, 3 years at the first startup I worked for were all in person. Towards the end of that job, we had optional work from home. I think 2 days to 3 days in the office, and then eventually, right before COVID hit, we had a WeWork, and then we got rid of it, and then COVID hit, and then ever since then, all my jobs have been remote.
Bobby, do you have any tips or tricks on those who might be going through their Codecademy courses and just feeling like the path and the journey is so long or it's become they need some motivation? What are some productivity tips that you kind of did for yourself as you were just starting off learning this coding skill?
I really committed to coding every day. I remember I was really on top of my daily streak. I didn't want it ever to fail, even if I was just completing, a small, not even a full course, just like one part of the course. Just me logging in and being present, doing something for that day. I mean, if you want to take weekends off, that's fine, but just committing to 20 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day. I found that if I did that and I thought I was going to be lazy and just do 20 minutes, I would end up doing like an hour because yeah, once you're there, you're like, I'm already here. I might as well keep going. But yeah, setting certain, I guess, milestones for yourself. Okay, I'm gonna do 5 days in a row, then I'll take a day off, or whatever cadence you want to do. But just making sure to hold yourself accountable.
You might have answered this question in your previous answer, but just in case there's something else. As a beginner, what helped you retain all the information?
I think just coding every day and putting what you're learning into practice. So if you're doing, let's say, a JavaScript course and you're learning about arrays, do something with arrays. Maybe go build like a small little website where you take an array of data and then you display certain data points on the web page, or say you can build an algorithm where you're manipulating the array data. Make sure to put it into practice. Don't just complete the lesson, say, okay, go move on to the next one. Try to solidify that information that you just learned by putting it into practice somehow.
Is the future bright for those of us coming late into tech with the nascent appearance of AI?
I think it's definitely a scary time for, I mean, myself included. I have almost 10 years of experience, but I think instead of being scared, kind of embrace the change. What I've heard from my colleagues, just who were talking about AI and how we use it in our day to day, they all agree that it's really great and beneficial at doing a lot of things like automating, repetitive tasks. But it's also not going to, solve everything. You're still going to need that foundation of software engineering to build solutions because it's not a perfect. And it might be at some point. I don't know, but right now, everybody still has jobs. There's still a need for people who know how to code or debug code, make code work that was generated by AI. So I don't think it's uh, a bleak time. I think it's more, okay, things are changing in the industry, which they always are, and we have to embrace that change instead of being stagnant or scared.
Hmm, great perspective. Did you take handwritten notes while you were learning?
I did. I was pretty old school. I remember in my downtime at work, I would write out algorithms on a sheet of paper, algorithms that I memorized. I think that's one good approach that I did that I don't suggest doing. Don't memorize code or algorithms. Have an understanding of what the algorithm is going to be doing and what it needs to do, and approach it kind of more logically on the steps that are involved, as opposed to trying to memorize, line for line what the algorithm is doing. Because that's a mistake that I made. My learning up until learning to code was all memorizational. And coding, yeah, you want to memorize certain things, but it's mostly kind of big picture concepts as opposed to memorizing kind of line per line of code. Because I don't think that's going to benefit you as much, and it would be really tough to do. Kind of more get a good high level grasp of coding concepts or certain kind of algorithms, and yeah, go from there instead of trying to memorize everything. Because I mean, you have the internet to access. I mean, I use Google or Stack Overflow constantly for my job. If I get stuck, I don't know everything. I don't expect myself to, and I'm constantly challenged and to learn and look things up.
In interviews, do they expect you to have memorized the algorithms?
They expect you to have an understanding of what they're asking for. So, for example, if you get asked to implement a sorting algorithm and they want you to know, why is this algorithm preferred over the other one? You want to be able to answer that just because some are faster in certain cases than others or more applicable given the use case. So I think having knowledge of, it's used for, or when the good use case for it is good. And obviously knowing how to implement it is also going to benefit you because if that's what they're asking for, you're going to know how to code it. But in terms of memorizing, like I was saying, don't get caught up in trying to memorize something line per line because that's an easy way to kind of foul yourself up because you could, create bugs if you didn't memorize something correctly. Make It's more important to have an understanding of kind of the logical sequence of how something works and then go from there and then, write the code out that way.
Any advice for salary negotiating, along with what's fair and what's not?
Definitely know what the market value is for your area, your years of experience, and don't be afraid to negotiate. I mean, the worst thing that will happen is that they'll say, no, this is what we're offering. Um, we can't go any higher. But if you don't try, you won't ever know.
That's good advice. Any other questions from our audience? You have been all asking really great questions, so thank you so much for your participation and engagement. Um, we'll give about 2 more minutes, and then if there aren't any more questions, we'll begin to wrap up. But Bobby, what is like one piece of advice now that you've gone through everything and you've started your journey very similar to the same place that our learners are might be right now? Looking back, what would you have told yourself back then? One piece of advice for really getting through the work and the unknown and the scary part of just trying something new.
I'd say always make sure to look back at the progress you've made. I mean, even if you just started, uh, the fact that you started it means something. And if you've done certain number of lessons, or if you have started on the job search, or started a certain course, go back and say, hey, I didn't know this, a few weeks ago, a year ago, and that I think will help motivate you and put some perspective into, the journey, because it's a journey. You're never going to stop having to learn when it comes to coding, because technology is constantly changing. I mean, especially now with AI, the approach to coding is changing, and you just have to remember that as long as you keep on, pushing yourself to keep on learning and not stay stagnant, then you're always going to be relevant.
Do you have a SaaS project of yours that you could share? A personal project that you've worked on?
I'd have to go check my portfolio site. I haven't dusted it off in quite a while, but if I find something, I'll link it. I'll send it to you, and maybe you could send it out to
Great.
the everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can post it in the event comments. Um, this might be our last question, but have you applied to any intern? Oh, not our last question. Do you have any, have you applied to any intern or externships?
Oh yeah, I mean that's how I got my first job. I applied to a contract to hire position, or AKA internship. It was paid. I At that time I couldn't afford to not take a paid position, but I did find a contract to hire position where they were paying me, and then it was a grace period of 3 months. Whether I proved myself in order to get hired full time, I got hired within 2 months. So yeah, that's one thing that I forgot to mention. Don't be afraid to take internships. If you can afford to do a free one, that's great. If you can't, try to find the paid ones. Any experience is better than no experience.
And when you have technical doubts, do you have any favorite websites or proper platforms to search for that info? Other than YouTube, what are some other favorite websites that you have found useful to know as a software engineer?
Yeah, YouTube used to be my main one, Stack Overflow, but this day and age, I've been getting more into prompt engineering and asking Copilot tools, and just creating prompts and having them kind of lead me that way. Just create a basic prompt, and keep on asking it questions to be more and more specific in terms of what you're looking for. But yeah, YouTube, Stack Overflow, and now Copilot prompts.
Was there anything in particular on Codecademy? I know that Codecademy journey probably felt like a long time ago, but was there anything particular on Codecademy that impacted your way of learning and thinking about coding?
I think the projects where it connected the dots, because when I first started, I learned HTML independently, CSS independently, JavaScript independently. Eventually, what was it? There's a JavaScript jQuery, and but it wasn't until I built something using all those technologies where it kind of all came together. I'm like, oh, okay, this is how you use it. This is the use case of, this function, or using classes in this language. Uh, yeah, so going from like a knowledge of a certain language to building something with multiple languages kind of broadens your experience of implementing those languages that you just learned, but also kind of a big picture of how they all fit together.
For someone who doesn't have a degree, do you think completing Codecademy is enough to be considered for an internship?
Yeah, I think any kind of experience, anything that you can use to boost up your resume is good. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have on there. But I think going back to the question about certifications like AWS, those are kind of more job specific and more intense. Some of them are paid. Uh, so unless you're really gonna uh, be going to that field or that specific kind of job, it may not be as useful if it's just your first job. But yeah, anything that you can do to kind of stand out on your resume is good. I mean, when I got my first job and was applying, I put the Codecademy certification that I completed for those 12 weeks, and then also the boot camp that I had worked on.
Nice.
Yeah.
Bobby, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. I think you just answered about 20 plus questions. And for our learners here, thank you so much for asking great questions. And I hope the answers that Bobby provided encourages you and also, provides some guidance in where you are currently in your journey. If you have any other questions for Bobby, you can put them on the comments on the event page, and I can work with Bobby to get those answers for you. Um, Thank you, Chandel. Chandel says thank you so much. But Bobby, are there any last parting words? Are there any social links that you would like to share if people want to connect with you or learn more about what you're doing?
Sure, I can provide my LinkedIn. Let me pop it into the chats right now. But in terms of parting words, I'd say don't get discouraged. I mean, I know AI is kind of a scary, I mean, it's scary for me too, and I have a lot of experience, but kind of embrace all the changes because the landscape is always changing in terms of technologies that are hot at this moment. They could be, use them for a portion of your career, then you have to learn new technologies. So just having that always be learning mindset. And if you get imposter syndrome, it's normal. Talk to people, friends, colleagues, coworkers, and ask for help. Lean on your community. And Codecademy is a great community. I remember taking the courses, and there would be the little chat rooms where you could ask questions, and people would just help each other. And that's what it's all about.
Yep. Thank you so much, Bobby. Thank you so much for all your insight and just your time and sharing your experience and your advice with us. Bobby just put his LinkedIn in the chat, so if you want to connect with him there, feel free. But other than that, thank you so much all for being here and just showing up with really great questions and being so engaged. We really appreciate everyone here in this room, and we hope to see you all at the next event. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Bobby.
You're welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.